Rivers are treasure trove of secrets. From all times, settlements have been built next to the rivers for better life, communication and defense. So a part of the legacy of our ancestors lies in the depths of the shorelands. Historians call these places archaeological monuments. It is true that older archaeological monuments are not known in Mažeikiai. This can be explained by the fact that the territory of Mažeikių region, which was on the very border of the three Baltic tribes, Curonians, Semaigalians, Samogitians, and life in border areas has not always been easy, especially when there is disagreement with neighbors and constant fighting. Thus, the conditions for the development of the present city territory were unfavorable. This was hindered by the prevailing wastelands and wetlands. However, sparsely populating people used the names of their settlements then. Historians and linguists have pointed out that a number of place names are derived from personal names. It is due to some often difficult to understand circumstances that even in times of early history, old place names are preserved over the years and over the generations. The name of Mažeikių region is not an exception. One of the theories states that the origin of the name of Mažeikiai can be associated with Duke Mažeika. In the 13th century, he was an important figure in the area, as his marches are told in the documents of the Livonian Order. Describing one of the marches to Livonia in 1290, the author of this chronicle points out that the Lithuanian army was led by Duke Mažeika. The armies under his leadership were large. After Mažeika attacked the Tulsi area in Curonia, the Knights of the Livonian Order did not dare to attack the invading Lithuanians with small forces, but waited for the largest possible Livonian Order army to gather in Riga. That time, the German Knights managed to win. Consequently, it can be assumed that the origin of the name of Mažeikiai is associated with this duke. And if Mažeika actually lived, then where could he reside? There are at least a few theories. According to the museum specialists, the most realistic thing is to connect Duke Mažeika with the Daubarei mound. From all times, people have been settled since ancient times, where there were fortifications of some sort. Because at that time, especially if you lived somewhere on the border between different tribes, you still needed to protect yourself. Daubarei is the most significant archaeological monument near Mažeikiai, the nearest. Well, there is another moment that the Duke already had to live on such a seriously fortified mound. And the Daubarei mound is very large, if you merge the two mounds, as archaeologists think it could be. Another moment is that the destruction of that manor also took place at the same time as the manor of Duke Mažeika was destroyed. And today, the Mažeikių region, a former border area of the Curonian, Semaigalian and Samogitian tribes, has a unique opportunity to help visitors feel the historical, cultural and spiritual heritage of three ethnic groups. It is simply such a historical situation that Mažeikiai is between three tribes. And that territory of Mažeikiai and maybe less archaeological findings in Mažeikiai itself as in the city, only random. Or, if anything had been found, it was taken to St. Petersburg in the 19th century while building a railway. At the time, it was believed that a variety of things would be needed in the afterlife. So, people were buried with guns, jewelry and even household items. Scientists and archaeologists have been studying the history of our country for many years, based on excavations in the mounds of Dapšiai, Daubarei, Jautakiai, Renavas, and in the surrounding cemeteries of Zastaučiai, Kukiai, Kiviliai, Skeriai, Mažeikiai, Griežė, Pavirvytė. The latter has been studied for 6 years. Even during the excavations, the richness of the Pavirvytė community became apparent, probably because it was surrounded by two rivers and fertile land. It is one of the most interesting monuments not only in the land of Semaigalians but also in the entire archaeological material of the Eastern Baltic. If we talk about scientific discoveries, they are really huge, because until that cemetery, it was thought that the Semaigalian territory would end on the Venta River. And when this monument was found and examined, and it was left by the Semaigalian community, it became clear that the Semaigalians also lived in the west from Venta to Virvytė. Significantly, we expanded the boundaries inhabited by Semi-Gallians. Another important discovery is that cemetery is on the border between the Semi-Gallians and the Curonians. Such cemeteries that are on the border of two tribes are very important. Due to the cultural point of view, they take over the cultural features not only on their own, but also of their neighbors. It is actually such a monument where we see how the Curonian culture differs from the Semi-Gallians, because specifically it is in the same area, but the graves are different, people are buried differently and burials are different. This is actually a very monument, as I would say a benchmark. And the graves of the Semi-Gallians are shallowly buried. It was just a custom to bury those people shallowly, because we also find graves at the depth of 45 centimeters and 50. And we are very lucky if the grave was 60 centimeters deep. Then we find it undamaged. Most of the graves were already destroyed while plowing. As I said, a lot can be told about that cemetery because the material is truly exceptional. And those graves that have not been damaged, they are practically all exceptional. The most memorable ones I should mention are two. Both are girls' graves, one 135, the other 138. I mean, I found the young girls were buried there. The graves were extremely interesting, and between them, 3 casting plates were found. This was the first time a casting plate was found in the grave of the territory of Lithuania, because until that moment, these plates were found only in the mounds, where, let's say, casting works were carried out. And here they were found in the grave, and at the girl's grave, and placed over her head. They were wrapped into a fabric that did not remain, just a buckle to that fabric. And in those plates was seen that the artifacts were cast there, apparently from the tin and small for jewelry. Because the melting temperature of tin is very low, and those craftswomen could, I guess, work in such conditions at home. And another tomb, as I mentioned, 138, where an extraordinary rich woman was buried. There were the 4 pins found to fasten her clothes, and one of them with a rosette head, and only 6 such are found in the whole Baltic. Very beautiful imported necklace from blue glass. It was most likely to be imported from Kiev, Russia. Silver brooches, a knife that is typical of Liv culture. I have not yet mentioned that not only the Curonian influence is felt there, but also the influence of the Livs, as apparently it was sailed to the border with the territory inhabited by the Livs in Venta. I would say such as combat knives, which was not typical for a Lithuanian woman, and there was buried with such a knife. Under our earth, our whole past rests. It is remembered by various objects that tell us about how people lived in the past, what they did, what they believed in. The museum presents the most interesting and eloquent findings of archaeologists to the public. For me, for example, those colors made up of several bands are very interesting. They are Semi-Gallians and very interesting and unique. And their decorations and their mastery. Cleaning those exhibits and preserving them revealed an ornamentation that was not visible when they were excavated. Well, it turned out that some are great works of art as well. So that old jewelry revealed to us many different secrets. Since 2018, the Mažeikių Museum has had an exhibition adapted for visually impaired visitors, discover, touch and hear the history of the Mažeikių region. Dr. Guido Sla, Dr. Emigija Vaitkutė and Martynas Stankus created copies of archaeological findings that were attached to special furniture. The exhibits can not only be touched, moved, but also measured. I didn't find it, but Adelė Holodinskienė found a helmet. It is also an extremely rare finding, to find a helmet in a cemetery. It is metallic, iron to be precise, only adorned with bronze. And of course, intended for the Curonian. It was found near the burial place of a dead grave, so to speak. And it was sullen over time in the literal sense of the word, because it was riveted from the sides, and those rivets are visibly broken. And because of the pressure of the ground, it was apparently all crushed. I just couldn't fragment it. that helmet? Either I was just thinking how that helmet looked like. I'd say that helmet looked like a piece of a flattened bucket. Repairing the tin, one does not fit because it's formed differently. Well, it was just a long game. Well, of course, during the restoration itself, there are a variety of technological options, as they all did. But the biggest contribution to the restoration should already be the merit of the restorers. Well, of course, after a part or detail has been restored, all of it, in this case a helmet, then the work is done by restorers, who try to reproduce and forge the same article that has already been restored by the restorers themselves. Well, the work of the archaeologists in this case is to find. And restorers, using that material, could restore it fully. When thinking about the weapons themselves, the most interesting, of course, is the core of the so-called Damask spearhead, which is called the wolf's teeth. The core of the spear, the central part, let's name it the feather, is formed with some kind of teeth. This technology is relatively complicated. It is found quite rarely in archaeological material. This shows that firstly it is the luxury item. The second thing is that the technological processes that were being carried out at that time were quite high in awareness and high level. Yes, it wasn't just to layer the iron and just coat it at the ends. But other technical elements are applied that make the aesthetic various. If the folding itself, the cording of that iron, the layering, the turning of that damask, it makes better steel itself, then at the moment those wolf teeth that are nailed are more aesthetic than given a function. As for the spear, which is on the tongue, possibly such a bronze ring, polygonal, it seems to me here is like a master, in a sense a challenge to another master. Try to do the same. Because I thought to myself, how this could be done? But I'm not a jeweler and I don't know the implications of those technological nuances. As possible when planting that bronze thing on a tang. I consulted with various jewelers and came to the conclusion that the place was probably covered with a specific clay and filled with bronze. And after that, it could be that the shape was already polygonal, or it had rubbed corners with some kind of rasp. That's it. Here's the thing, let's say try to put an egg in a bottle. How will it work? Swords and axes were inseparable from the wars of that time. Anyway, there are fan axes, so they are found more often among the Curonians. These axes are especially specific and because of their use and manufacturing technologies. It would probably be one of the more complex weapons. They were put on about 1,80 meters to 2 meters length rod. They were the very word fan, in the shape of a fan. Fairly broad blade, about 20–22 centimeters, with such pointed tips. One function was to hang behind the formation, behind the soldiers covered in keel, hooked behind their backs and pulled out. Meaning it was used to disassemble formations. It is clear that when somebody hit with that axe, he had the power to cross. He could cross. Needless to say, it could have stabbed because, firstly, it had such a spike at that angle. It was as multifunctional weapon as we could now say. Swords are very rarely found in graves. In the material of the graves, let's say it's so that maybe out of 100 buried men, maybe one sword could be found. But what we now see in the museum, some swords are folded, some are straight. This is purely related mainly to funeral traditions. Funeral traditions were constantly changing, and as we see in this case, the swords are folded, and some of the swords are straight. Here is purely a change of worldview. Well, I see only two elements that would justify this whole tradition. It is one thing for that weapon to enter with the dead man into the afterlife to serve. It is folded and put in the grave. In some religions, things also have certain souls, symbolism and something like that. And in order to cross exactly the same barrier of the living and the dead, they also had to be destroyed. Now, if we looked from the other side, there were also grave robberies in those days, and that's one of the protections to stop using the same things. They were simply burned, broken or something like that. It may be the practical part of such a ritual, but it may equally be related to their very spiritual worldview. Scientists, artists and designers of the Vilnius Academy of Arts, together with the staff of the Mažeikių Museum, implemented a modern and interactive artistic scientific project Mažeikių region among the Curonians, Samaigalians and Samogitians. And the modern archaeological exposition has been displayed here since 2011. In fact, we were very lucky to have 300 square meters of space in the Mažeikių Museum. And that height matched, because it would have been very expensive to redo all that furniture here. It is also clear that Mažeikių municipality made a great contribution, because to do all that work and to clean and create publications and make furniture that would be suitable for the museum's success. Because next to such an exposition, such an entrance to the museum, which previously existed, could not be. We managed to reconcile all this. We repaired that whole hall and even the accesses. And so, we were able to open this exhibition here. Well, and of course, it was very important that we were able to turn to the best Lithuanian restorers at the Gudynai Restoration Center. Mažeikiai is very rich, but archaeology is such that when it's dug out of the ground, it starts to decay even more. It was all perfectly cleaned, preserved. Well, it was interesting and unbelievable for us at first when the idea to transport came up. Well, 22 museums, including national ones, Kaunas and so on, what will we change from those Mažeikiai? But when we started looking in detail at not only what was on display, but in detail what is in the funds turned out to be very rich. Well, it came just a moment of that material, so it could unfold in all its beauty. So let's say now Mažeikiai is exceptional, at least in such an exposition sense. In many cases, it holds its own way, and sometimes it is, I would say, more interesting and innovative than the expositions of museums in such relatively large cities. The treasures of the land showing the history of Mažeikiai are waiting for you right here. The museum's exhibits, which were left by their ancestors and have fallen into our hands these days, give us an extraordinary gift to feel the way of our ancestors' life. So, we invite you to the old world of the Curonian, Samaigalian and Samogitian Mažeikių region.